All right, in this explainer, we're going to dive into a worldview that challenges something most of us take for granted, the shape of our own planet. We're going to lay out the core arguments from a book that claims the Earth isn't a globe at all.
So the author really frames their entire argument around this one big idea. For them, it's not just about geography, it's about what happens when you start to believe you've been lied to on a massive scale. This quote really sets the tone for a deep dive into skepticism.
Okay, so let's get right into it. The author's case starts by going directly after the credibility of the big institutions that give us our picture of the world, and they put a special focus on NASA.
So the first big claim the book makes is that the visual evidence we all have of a globe, well, it's just not real. It claims that the famous images of Earth are known to be faked, even pointing to a quote from a NASA employee who says they're photoshopped. The author also flags these weird anomalies, like what they claim is a ground squirrel spotted in a photo from Mars, and they say that all satellite photos are just CGI.
Now this is where things get really interesting. The author's point about technology. They basically argue we've gone backwards. The book asks this really pointed question. How on earth could we have the technology to send people to the moon back in the 1960s, but then, years later, NASA says that ability has been, and I'm quoting the author here, mysteriously lost?
Next, the book throws a major physical challenge into the mix. It points way up to the thermosphere, the layer where satellites are supposed to be hanging out, and it notes that the temperatures up there can hit nearly 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Just think about that for a second. And that huge number leads right into a really simple, direct question from the author. If satellites are made of stuff like aluminum, gold, and plastic, materials that would melt way, way below 4,000 degrees, how could they possibly survive in the thermosphere? For the author, it's just a logical impossibility.
Okay, so if satellites aren't real, then what's the deal with our connected world? Well, the author has an answer for that. The book argues it's all based right here on the ground. A massive existing network of undersea cables and a whole lot of cell towers are what's actually handling all of our global communications.
All right, so we've looked at the challenges to the official story. Now the argument shifts gears and moves on to what the author calls observable proofs, evidence they claim anyone can go out and check for themselves.
A huge part of this argument comes down to something really simple: water. The author's point is that water always finds its own level. They state that no one has ever been able to measure any curve on any body of water, ever. So for them, the oceans of the world prove the Earth is one big level plain.
And this is where the author brings in some pretty wild real-world examples. They list all these long-distance views that they claim just shouldn't be possible on a globe, like seeing city skylines or lighthouses from so far away they should be hidden by the curve. They also point to videos from high-altitude balloons, which they say show a perfectly flat horizon. Get this, the argument even uses architecture to try and prove its point. The author explains it like this. On a curved surface, if you put up two perfectly vertical beams, they wouldn't actually be parallel. They'd point away from each other slightly. This would mean a tall building would have to be wider at the top than the bottom. But since skyscrapers aren't built that way, the book says the ground must be flat.
And it's not just buildings, it's aviation too. The author points to an airplane's gyroscope, right? That's the instrument that keeps things level. They argue it proves that planes fly on a perfectly level plane. If the Earth were a globe, they claim pilots would constantly have to be nosing the plane down to follow the curve. But the gyroscope shows that just doesn't happen.
Okay, so the last major piece of the argument. This one moves beyond what you can see and measure and goes straight into theology. The author identifies as a Bible literalist, and for them, Scripture is the final word, the ultimate source of truth about our world.
The author's whole view here is that the Bible, when you read it literally, paints a very specific picture of our world. It describes an Earth that doesn't move, that's fixed on foundations, and that's covered by a solid dome, a firmament, where the sun, moon, and stars are placed.
And this particular verse is held up as a key piece of evidence. The author's argument is that on a globe, it doesn't matter how high you go. It's just geometrically impossible to see all the kingdoms of the world. But on a flat plane? Well, then it just becomes a matter of sight and magnification, making the verse literally possible.
And it doesn't stop there. The book pulls out a bunch of other passages to back this up. You see phrases like the Earth being firmly established and that it cannot be shaken, or the heavens being spread out like a canopy. It talks about the four corners of the Earth and how it was spread out. The author takes all of these descriptions literally.
So you might be asking, why does any of this matter? Why is this such a big deal for the author? Well, the book's conclusion makes it clear.
This isn't just about geometry. It's about our fundamental place and our purpose in the universe.
What it really boils down to, according to the book, is a choice between two completely different realities. On one hand, you have the globe model, where we're just a tiny speck in a giant empty universe, and humanity is a cosmic accident. On the other hand, you have the flat Earth model, where the world is this enclosed, designed system, and humanity is the special, central focus of a creator.
And that's the real takeaway for the author. The globe model isn't some scientific discovery. They see it as an ideological weapon. It's a deception, they argue, designed to make every single one of us feel small and insignificant, and in doing so, cut us off from any sense of divine purpose or a creator.
And that brings us to the end of this look into the book's arguments. The author's ultimate challenge to you, the viewer, isn't just about what shape you believe the Earth is, it's a much deeper question about belief itself. Who or what do you trust more? The official story from authority, or what you can see and figure out for yourself?